everyone. Welcome to the Glittery Musings podcast. My name is Callie,
I'm Amy.
and we decided to start this podcast on a whim in a used bookstore after seeing all the copies of Twilight and me convincing Amy after throwing out years of podcast ideas we should do together, realizing we just had so much to say about the Twilight franchise. Uh, so we are going to be rereading all the Twilight books. Um, and we're starting off with Twilight, which is book one, and then we're tandem reading it with Midnight Sun. Amy has put together all the corresponding chapters and reading orders. As well as we'll be watching the movies in tandem also. So she's also broken up the time stamp chunks that you can watch. So you can read along with us. It's all on our Instagram at Glittery Musings is our handle. We're on TikTok and Instagram. Follow us.
And we'll be on YouTube the same name.
Yes. Okay, so I think we're gonna start off by just saying when was the last time we read the books and watched the movies. So Amy, jump in.
Yeah, so I looked at this when I was reading because I couldn't remember the last time I did, and I realized that I first read Twilight after I saw the first movie, so in 2008 when I was in 8th grade. And then I read the whole series, and then I reread each book as the movie came out. So the last time I read any of the books was when Breaking Dawn Part 2 came out, or just before, which was 2012. So it's been a while. And then the movies I have seen more often. I own them and have watched them. It was about a year ago was the last time that I watched. So
Yeah. Um, yeah, okay. So I have not reread them since I originally read them, which was I think around the same time. I was telling Amy before we started recording, like in my mind, I read all the Twilight books before I watched the first movie, but that doesn't the years like don't line up for how that actually like would work. Um, but yeah, I think I started reading Twilight again in the big like heyday of it. So I think I read Twilight in 7th grade. Because I'm a year younger than Amy, so it would have been like around the same time. Which the important thing to note, one, besides the fact that like I personally and neither of us have really read these since we've been out of not even like for me, not even like a 17-year-old teenager. Like we're talking like 13-year-old teenager. So
yeah,
I'm so curious.
the last
Yeah.
book came out before the first movie came out. So
Oh,
that's
it
kind of
did.
crazy.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
So
The
it is
last book came
possible.
out just like a month before the first movie was released.
Okay. Okay. So I, in theory, could have read them all
You could have,
before
in theory.
I don't know. Yeah, that I would have who
I think
knows?
they
Who knows?
probably got like more popular since a movie was coming out about them. So it's
Right.
possible that you at least read Twilight before you saw the movie. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
realized that I had not because I realized that's the reason I was Team Jacob was because Taylor Lautner I thought was more attractive than Edward. I
Obviously.
was going to say Edward Pattinson, Robert Pattinson. Oh, speaking of which, I'm wearing my Batman shirt.
It's so good.
For
I
those who
have to
can't
get
see and
one.
are listening to the recording, it is a picture of Edward from Twilight and says the Batman on it in Twilight font. So
Our Pats. Uh
anyway,
yeah. So having not read it as adult, I also I have not rewatched the movies. I've never reread the books, and not because I didn't like them. I mean, the movies were like hit or miss for me, like many people. I absolutely loved Breaking Dawn Part 2. It was one of the greatest days of my life. I say that unashamedly all the time, but not necessarily just because of Breaking Dawn Part 2. But that was one of I think maybe the best movie in the franchise, but we'll
I
have to
think so
see.
too.
We'll have to see.
I was
Um
also shocked, a little bit of spoiler, but not really, that of the scene that happened in the movie that nobody was expecting, and I feel like everyone was shocked about. I don't know if you remember what scene
Yes,
this is. Okay, yeah,
absolutely.
I figured you
Absolutely.
did.
It was shocking. I was like, oh, yeah, so good. So good. That's why it was so good, was
Yeah, yeah.
that scene, I think. Um, yeah, so I'm excited to reread them. Yeah, and liked them was definitely part of the initial hype when they came out. Uh, yeah, so I don't know. I'm excited. I'm excited.
Me
I already
too.
have a lot of thoughts, and I'm really excited to see what opinions change. I think that'll be like a decent amount of the conversation
Yeah.
throughout the podcast. So
I
again,
think
if
it's
you,
also interesting doing the tandem read with Midnight Sun, getting the perspective of Edward. I'm like, I feel like this might make me more
yes,
Team Edward because I get his thought process behind things versus I'm like, when I read it from Bella's perspective or watch the movie, I'm like, why is he doing this? Like, so you get some
yes.
perspective on certain things.
Okay, we're obviously going to jump into it, but I am loving reading Midnight Sun. Like, which is so surprising to me because I hate dual POV fiction. Like, it drives me crazy, but for whatever reason, I'm so into it. I'm like so into it. Um, I've been Team Edward since the beginning. I don't know if you can see my Zoom username is Team Edward. So I was Team Edward initially. It actually has caused a lot of like self-reflection in my life. Like, what's up that I'm so consistent to these like old powerful mythical creatures. The amount
Not
that
just Team
I
Edward. We're talking other
no,
books too.
no, it's not. It's not. The amount that I make comparisons in my notes to Reese and Feyre, like,
Okay, I also did the same thing. Probably not as much. I only did it a couple times, but I definitely made about that in my
oh
notes.
my gosh. Yeah. So on that note, apparently we're spoiling other book series too. So
Yeah,
be
I guess.
prepared.
Yeah.
Uh whatever. You're into books, you're on the internet, you know. Okay, anyways, on that note, spoilers. um we we had some debate on if we were going to be spoiler free so that people like could read Twilight for the first time with us. But we decided like there's just like some big things that I think talking about the themes and the foreshadowing, like part of the fun of the reread is that like we do know where it's gonna end up, I think. Also, I'm kind of like, if you're listening to the podcast, the odds that you don't know who Bella ends up with is like insane. Like I think we all know.
And
So
it has been 16 years since the last book was
yeah,
published. So we've
yeah.
given people their time.
We've had plenty of time for you to get caught up.
Or if you
And
haven't read them yet, you could start reading them and then come to the podcast once you're done with the series.
yeah, true, true. Yeah, so there will be like some spoilers for like the ending of the book, bigger plot things. We're gonna try if we make an explicit reference to something coming up later, like we just talked about with that scene from Breaking Dawn Part 2, which the real ones all know exactly what we're talking about. Uh
We'll get there eventually.
yeah, we'll get there, but that's
We'll
not
talk
today.
much more in depth.
Yeah, then we will try to be explicit and say like spoiler about X so that you can like decide if you want to have it spoiled for you or not. But
Also,
generally,
I don't recall if we said this or if it was before we started recording that neither of us have read anything outside of the original Twilight saga. I don't remember if
oh
I did.
yeah,
But
I
yeah.
don't think we have. Yeah, so we both have read the original saga, so that is Twilight, New Moon, Breaking Eclipse, Breaking Dawn. But neither of us have read the novella, The Secret Life of Bree Tanner, right?
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
novella.
That's what it is.
We neither of us have read Midnight Sun before. Neither of us have read the gender swapped one.
Didn't even know
Um,
that existed till a couple months ago, to be
I
honest.
absolutely thought it was fanfic. Like I can't I
It
love
sounds like fan
that
fiction.
Stephenie Myers is publishing her own fanfic about her own work. Like she should be profiting. I love that. I also just got like kind of a long like intro to I guess there's a long intro that Stephenie Meyer's writes, justifying her choices in who she gender swaps and who she doesn't.
Oh,
Um, and mostly it's around like that Charlie could never get custody as like a unemployed. Anyways, it's a whole thing.
that's
Anyways,
so interesting. I didn't think about it being gender swapped for everybody. I just thought
it's
like main
everyone.
characters.
Yeah. No,
Oh,
I didn't
okay.
really. It's
That's
everyone
interesting.
except Bella's parents are gender swapped.
Huh,
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting.
Um, yeah. Anyways, so that's that. We'll obviously get into those more, but for today, we're reading chapter 1 through 3 in Twilight, 1 through 4 in Midnight Sun, and the first 25 minutes of the Twilight movie is what we have watched slash read. Uh, so let's jump in. Amy, do you have any initial, do we want to go, I think we'll go like chapter by chapter. Does
Yeah,
that
that's
work?
easiest for me because of the way
Yeah,
I have my
same.
notes organized.
Same. Okay, great. So, chapter 1, Twilight. I took the most notes on this chapter, and then I was annoyed reading my own notes back to myself. I was like, ugh, Callie, I was over it. So, so then I changed. I started my notes by going like page number, like super explicitly, but then I was just making references to things that were happening in the book, which again is fine, but it was less about like things I wanted to talk about. So, anyways, this first chapter is slightly different. But the first note I have on the book is that the book starts with a Bible verse from Genesis. What? That right there. I was like,
Okay, wait,
this
what is
is,
it? I don't. I'm
let me pull it up. I've got my copy readily available. It's
not
from
sure if it's
Genesis.
a
It's
quote that I have
about the
highlighted or not.
tree of knowledge of good and evil. So it says this is Genesis 2:17 for anyone who cares. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. Uh yeah, so then my comment, which I think is like a kind of a cool concept, like the idea that she knows about the vampire world. Spoilers, they're vampires.
But what?
Just kidding. You know, because you're reading Midnight Sun. But at this point, like, we don't know, which is we'll talk about that more later. But so interesting. It is different reading both the books at the same time. Um,
Oh,
okay,
okay. I'm just now pulling this up, and it's like that was even before the preface, and I'm like, I'm pretty
yes.
sure I just like skipped over it.
Yeah, it's in between, it's right after the table of contents.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I was
Um,
like, why don't I have a note about this? But
yeah. But I think it's interesting the idea of like, okay, it's her knowledge of the vampire world is like the first thing that, like, that's gonna be the death of her, basically, is what she's saying. And then I was like, is that why it's an apple? Like the hands holding the apple of the cover? Because I've never known.
yeah, I always wondered about that. And also, I noticed, I've watched the films quite a few times since they've come out, and we'll get more into depth about this. But there is a scene that happens within I think, yeah, it was within the first 25 minutes, where Edward catches an apple that Bella's on,
Yes.
and it's like
Yes.
the cover. And I
Mm-hmm.
never noticed that until this watched through. And I was like, how did I not notice that? But anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be in depth, guys. But yeah, so that's my first comment on the book is before chapter 1 even. Because I had never noticed that before.
Yeah,
Yeah, anyways.
I have mine organized, so I'm reading mine on my Kindle, and I actually got the Kindle app for my laptop so that I could type out notes faster. So I just
Yes.
highlight things and type them out. So that's what I've been doing. And the first thing that I had highlighted was one of the first lines in the preface, which
Mm,
I just was noticing, like, in your Kindle when it shows what's highlighted by other users, like it shows how
yeah,
many highlights there have been. So
yeah.
I decided to keep track of those and which one was the most highlighted for each section to
Oh,
read. I
I
thought would
love
be fun.
that.
So this
Yeah.
one, it was in the preface. So it was when life offers you a dream so far beyond any of your expectations, it's not reasonable to grieve when it comes to an end. So that was my first
Hmm.
note about that. But
Hmm.
I also feel like there's a
Interesting.
lot of foreshadowing with the preface
Yes.
or even the first chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure there is. Uh yeah. Okay, I'm looking at my first like couple notes, mostly around okay, the first thing is her relationship with her dad. I knew they were like awkward around each other, but it's really so highlighted in the first couple like chapters here, just how uncomfortable she is with Charlie. Like,
Mhm.
and so my note here is like her quoting saying like she wasn't allowed to call him Charlie and like you keep seeing her have to like catch herself, which is just really interesting. And this is in later chapters, but later as in within these first three still. um but her when she opens up to Edward about why she moved, like it is like really sad, like it makes me sad, like she's just so like unprioritized herself, to like make these adults in her life happy. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just obviously it's a bummer. Like she's miserable in this new town, the chapter is not like happy. And that
Yeah.
Charlie is so clearly into her mom still, like they note the wedding pictures up and things like that.
Yeah,
Um,
I also noted this stuff, and I'm just looking for one of my notes here. There was a line that was in the first chapter that says something about Charlie left first off to the police station that his wife and family, and I made a note. And I'm like, so is that the reason they got divorced? Like,
right.
we don't really get a specific answer about that, I don't think. But
No, I don't think
I also
either.
kept questioning throughout this chapter. I'm like, why did Bella move to Forks? Because they make it sound like it was her decision. And I'm
Yes.
like, why'd she come? Kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that was a
No, me
question.
too. And I did not remember the rationale.
Yeah, neither did I because I don't. Well, maybe it is talked about in the movie, but
Yeah. 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 So mostly I'm bummed for Bella. Like highlight though is I was like, wow, me and Bella have gone through so much of the same thing. Not in the dating a vampire thing, but okay, because I like looking it up, the high school, I went to a really big high school for the beginning of my freshman year, and then I moved to this tiny really small high school in northern Minnesota earlier than she did, but they were about the same size. So
yeah,
I
I
really
I made a note of this. I highlighted it because I'm like, how big was Callie's class? Like my
yes.
class was like 600 kids per class, and this
Mm-hmm.
what it said 357 total students, or
Yeah.
358 with her, and that's
Yeah.
about 90 kids per class. I'm like, I think yours was smaller.
Yeah. My graduating class was 86.
Okay,
So yeah,
so pretty close. So maybe the same
yeah,
size.
right. Basically the same size. Yeah, so I was just really encouraged that I have a lot of empathy for Bella. It's the worst. I also did not want to move to my small town school. So there's that.
Yeah.
Less important to the plot and just some lore of Callie, but yeah. Um, okay, let's see. Oh, so next I start talking, my notes move to like her actually going to school. Do you have any more thoughts on like her home life with Charlie before this?
Um, oh, the only other thing that I made note of that happened before she started going to school was that Charlie mentioned something about Billy Black, and so that's
Oh
Jacob's.
yeah.
I don't know the person Jacob lives with.
Um,
It's not his. Is it his father?
I think
I,
it's his uncle, maybe.
yeah, something like that.
I don't
But
remember. Yeah.
anyway, he mentioned Billy Black, and she said something about how she didn't remember him, which I just was surprised by because the movie starts out a different way, and you're introduced to Jacob earlier, and
Yeah.
she remembers both of them. So it just made
Right.
me question: does she remember Jacob at all? Like, because she doesn't
Yeah.
remember Billy. So that was just a
Right.
thought I had. But
Right. No, same. Um, yeah. So then transitioning into her first like moments of high school. One, again, talking about her relationship with Charlie, so weird to me that like the first time she's going to the school is her first day driving herself. Like that just seems like very weird off to me.
yeah,
Um, okay, and then my next note is obviously a mention of Edward's car, his Volvo. obviously it's a huge deal. The spokesman for Volvos everywhere. The next thing, so now we're in the cafeteria for my notes. This is page 20. Uh, Bella is seeing the Cullen family for the first time. She's getting the lore about what's up with them. And who else is super weirded out that they're pretending to be adopted siblings and openly dating? That is so weird to me. Like, do one or the other.
Yeah, it's a weird thing for sure. And I also made
Yeah.
note of I just completely forgot that Rosalie and Jasper have a different last name, and they say that they're foster children and twins. And I was
Yeah.
like, why would they do that? But then I realized that they're I think the two is newest excuse me, two newest family members. I know Jasper's definitely the newest. I think Rosalie might be
Yeah.
before that. Um, and so maybe they just didn't want to like draw attention to themselves adopting so many children, like, and so foster children seemed more plausible or something, and they passed as twins. So I don't know. Thought that was a little odd. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I did not get it. I mean, and yeah, so interesting. I mean, they talk more about being like Alice and Jasper downplay their relationship a little more at the high school, but so weird. So weird to me. The first impression of the Cullen family is not a glowing one,
yeah,
which,
this happened
yeah.
like was this book was written today. I don't think it would have gone that way.
I mean, and maybe it's trying to point out the idea that like they are this like, you know, quirky, weird family. They don't fit in. It
Yeah,
is
that's
it
true.
is adding to that the lore that the town is like keeping distant from them. And everyone's kind of like uncomfortable around them. So that it is doing that correctly, but still weird to me. Still weird.
Yeah, it definitely is weird. I also like made a note when it isn't right here, but since we're kind of on the topic, about how Rosalie and Emmett seem like the weirdest couple to me. Like of all the people to pair together, I would not pair those two together, you know? Like I
Yeah.
just
Yeah. Okay, A Court of Thorns and Roses, spoilers, but have you heard the fan theories that are like Rosalie and Emmett are just Nesta and Cassian? I don't totally see it,
I
to
mean,
be
I can
honest.
see it somewhat because yeah,
It
I
just
can see it somewhat, but I like Nesta and I don't
yeah,
really
I
like Rosalie.
no, I think that's where I'm at is I really hate Rosalie and I do like Nesta, but I didn't like Nesta at first. So maybe if we had a
Oh
whole book that was just Rosalie and I almost said Cassie
yeah,
and
Rosalie
and
Cassian.
Emmett. Yeah, maybe then I would be more into her. But right
No,
now I'm
I
not.
when we were like reading this and reading Midnight Sun, and I was like, I'm disappointed that they don't have all of the books from Edward's perspective or everybody's perspective. I
Yeah,
feel like I like his character much more and want to like hear more.
yeah. Yeah. Um I mean, I guess let's wrap up any other thoughts we have about Twilight Book One, because then absolutely to jump into Edward's perspective for sure, because I
Yeah.
have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah. I made a note about when we're getting introduced to the Cullens, about Jessica's comments. I'm like, I hate Jessica so much.
Yeah, she's
She's the one
the
telling
worst.
Bella all of this and was talking about how they're all kind of together or whatever. And Bella makes some comments about how it's really nice that Mrs. Cullen adopted all these kids. And she's like, yeah, I guess so. I don't think she can have kids though. What does that have to do with
Yeah,
anything?
no,
So rude.
she's so rude. Jessica is the worst. What a
That's
dum
like the
dum.
only time I've ever hated Anna Kendrick is her playing Jessica.
Oh my gosh, I forgot. You're right. I like forgot to make a note about that when I was watching, but I was like, this is yeah, it's weird. I totally forgot she was in Twilight.
I've
Yeah.
seen interviews of her. She also has forgotten that she's in Twilight. So you're not
So good. So good. Okay, hold on. Let me see what other Oh, I did make a comment about the bad smell meme, obviously, because we get that scene in this
such
first the
over
first
dramatic scene.
so dramatic. So dramatic. Yeah, we're just kind of like, I guess, adding in some of our movie thoughts in here. But yeah, I specifically made that note. Uh and talking about all the tendons in his hand and arm, like clearly Stephenie Meyers is into it. Yeah, lots of people. I don't know. It's a whole thing on the internet right now, I feel like. But
Yeah.
uh yeah. Oh, yeah, so my last note for me on Twilight Book 1 is just the insane cringiness of this first chapter. Like
Yeah.
particularly the lab scene, it's so cringe. Like, it's a good thing I am not a person who just reads one chapter of books because this was not the
Wouldn't have
easiest
finished
first.
Twilight.
It's not the easiest first chapter to suck me into a story for sure. I
I
was just,
Yeah, I think it makes it really realistic. Like I made a note here about her response to like Edward just talking about how it wasn't fair and he was so mean, and I'm like, in reality he wasn't really doing anything. He just looked uncomfortable. He was staring,
yeah,
but still. I'm like, you
yeah,
say he was so mean, and I'm like, it seems like a really dramatic response, but it's honestly probably how I would have reacted in high school. I'd been like, what's that guy's problem with me? Versus
yeah,
what happened now, I'd be like, something was off with that guy. Like,
yeah. Having a
so I think
bad
it's
day.
a good perspective of a high school student in that
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
awkwardness of it all
yeah.
as
That's
well.
true. That's true. All right. Do we want to transition to Midnight Sun?
Yeah, yeah. Those are all my
Great.
notes for that. So
Great. Okay, now feels like a great time to mention once again how much I'm loving Midnight Sun. But Midnight Sun Chapter 1 is not what sold me on that because it is so creepy. It's so creepy. This is I just need to say that before we jump in to like my notes because blah, blah. I was like, oh, am I gonna hate Edward rereading this as an adult? It did not sell me.
yeah, I
Uh,
also like had expectations going into this that there'd be more about what he did in that time between like him not being in school or while he was not in school. And
yeah,
like, I mean, obviously that is what it is talking about, but I thought like he would go hunting or talk with his family. And it's like, nope, he went to Alaska.
yeah, right? Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, uh, page one, first of all, it I get they have to start in high school because then they're able to stay in a city longer, like the younger they pretend to initially come in. But what a terrible way to spend your immortality,
Mhm.
consistently redoing high school. Awful, awful, the worst.
Yeah.
Um, okay, also this is proof that I really have not reread the books or watched the movies. I did not remember Edward could read minds. Had zero, did not remember that
Okay.
at all. And so
Really?
my page two notes are wait. Edward can read minds?
Yes. Yes.
I remembered about Alice. I remembered about Alice seeing the future. No recollection that Edward could read minds, which is
But do
such
you
a
remember
huge part.
anybody else's power? The only other person that I can think of that has powers is Jasper. Do you remember his?
No, I have no
Okay.
idea.
Yeah. I think it might mention it actually in the thing we read. I think they very, very briefly mention it in
Okay.
Midnight Sun in the section we read. But do you want me to tell you or no?
Yeah.
He has like mood control over other people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is that what they're talking
Which
about
he
when
doesn't
he's
use
like
a lot.
seeing, when he's like seeing red? Like Edward when like towards the end in chapter 3 of Midnight Sun where all of a sudden he's seeing red. Is that what they're implying then? Because I
I
just assumed it was like he's reading Jasper's
you
mind, who is
know
so intent on
um
murder.
I don't recall exactly what you're talking about, but I don't think that's
Okay.
I think there's a note of it
Okay.
um I swear I have a note on it somewhere that yeah, I'm not gonna find it.
Okay. All right.
But I have
We'll
a
get
note
to
on
that
it where
later.
it's mentioned somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that's my first big takeaway. 100% forgot about that. And then once again, just solidifying the resand correlations, which we'll talk about more. I have a longer, more in-depth note on my thoughts.
Okay, it's like the fourth chapter. I just found my note on Jasper's power. It's like the fourth
Okay.
chapter. And it just has a line that says, "It said much that he had not tried to calm Rosalie down with his extra faculties, nor did he now try to rile her up." So
Okay.
I think
Okay.
that's nothing. But anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
very, very minorly mentioned. But
Okay. Yeah, and then they just talk about like Emmett being super strong, but not like overtly like he has super strength.
yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah.
And I don't
Um,
recall if anybody else has powers that we know of.
yeah.
Those are the only ones I know of, but
Okay. Yeah. Um, yeah. So really absolutely did not remember that. Okay, but I was like, this makes so much more sense having Edward and Alice together being such, I mean, an asset to the family. One, like he is kind of invaluable. Obviously, like they do a good job painting like the love between the Cullens for the most part, except for Rosalie, the worst. But um but yeah, like he's such an asset. Like, and that makes sense. I feel like one complaint is like, how do people not know? How can they get away with it? But like him being able to read like and like listen for even those initial thoughts that people would be suspicious of them makes a lot of sense
and
for how they're able.
sorry, I
No, no,
had a
no.
note about Edward's power because they talk about it more. You obviously get it from his perspective in Midnight Sun, and he talks about being able to read Alice's mind when she's having visions. And I'm like, so he basically also has Alice's power if he could read her mind if she's like in the vicinity. And I'm like, did we
Yeah.
know that from like the original series before Midnight Sun? And I don't remember that being prominent in the movies, and I don't recall in the books, but
No.
I'm like, I don't think I knew that. Like,
Yeah. I do think though, like, I mean, it's interesting because like clearly Alice can like at least somewhat control that. Like you see that in chapter 4, where she's just so intensely thinking about Jasper because she doesn't want Edward to like see the memories with Bella.
yeah,
Um, so or the future,
yeah.
not the memories. Um, yeah, okay, to jump back, Midnight Sun, chapter 1.
This is
Um,
gonna be a long episode.
oh my gosh, yeah. Okay, but my notes are also much shorter for these ones because I'm going more on like vibes. But I do think it's so interesting he can't read her thoughts. Do you remember, like, did we know that? Like, is that like overt from the first books, like, or movie? Because
Yeah, it is because they have a conversation at some point, and
okay,
Edwards talks about how he can't read her thoughts. So
okay,
it is
okay.
something that's stated. But I found it. This is jumping forward. I'll wait till we get to that point. I'll wait.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so then my only other thought for chapter 1 is just how creepy. Like it's just he's so creepy. Murder Plan be hella creepy.
Yeah,
Adult read, I get why people hate Edward. That's my impression I end chapter 1 with as a Team Edward person.
yeah.
Yeah. And just it's like intense. Like it is like there's no love there. There's no like I feel like other fantasy books like you have the main powerful male character and they're like so shocked or enamored. Like this is like enemies to lovers from Edward's perspective. Like way more. Like there's intense like hatred murder vibes. There's no like he's like you're average and I hate you and I want to kill you. Like so intense, so intense. Anyways, so that's that. I don't know if you have more thoughts beyond.
Yeah, I'm just
the
realizing that I messed
creepiness.
up in my head what chapter one was. I was thinking of the next point for Edward, but I'm like, no, we're getting the same perspective. So I think I referenced some things that are not relevant to what we're discussing. But
Eh,
yeah, no, I'm just looking through my notes to see if I have anything else. I just have notes about him being, yeah, creepy and whatnot. But it was interesting to see things more from his perspective, since like that really intense scene in the science lab or whatever,
yeah,
like when he's talking about his perspective, I'm like, okay, that makes sense as to why it's so dramatic, like in the movies
right,
particularly, because
for
he
sure.
like is, planning the murder of all of these children, and
Yeah,
it's a little
yeah,
intense. So
yeah. Okay, but do you think that Stephenie Meyers went to Robert Pattinson and like gave him an inside look and was like, play it this intense? Or because the book came out in 2020,
yeah,
Midnight
I have
Sun.
this thought because
Yeah,
I think I made here. Let me look at my note. It was the
yeah.
first note of the chapter.
Because
Um,
I'm like,
I was
is this
like,
justifying like
yeah,
his intense acting? And is it like then that inspired her to write this intense first chapter? That
yeah.
was my question.
I highlighted this thing about where he was comparing high school to purgatory and whatnot. And I made a comment and I was like, I wonder if Stephenie Meyer was inspired by Robert Pattinson for this book, because I could definitely see him talking about Twilight like this, because it's
Yes.
known how much he hated filming Twilight, which he has since gone back on and says now has fond memories of. But at the
Yeah.
time,
He has
was not a
fond
fan.
checks coming in for every time it's streamed.
Yeah,
That's the truth, Robert.
yeah. But my thought is that she went back and wrote this and was somewhat taking from the movie as well.
Yeah.
But I do like have questions about her writing process and things.
Yeah. When
Because
she comes on the podcast, when we blow up
yeah,
and we're huge,
yeah,
we'll ask her. Everyone make note. This is the first question we're asking Stephenie.
yeah. There we go. Now I'm
Uh,
looking through my notes if there's anything else, because I thought we were on a different chapter.
oh
So
yeah. Yeah.
oh, I did make a note that he, after they go to the science lab, that he goes and hides in his car, and I'm like, that is such a funny thing to do when you are a vampire and have super speed and can go literally anywhere, and you just go to your car in the parking lot.
He doesn't want to get in trouble for skipping school. He's staying on school grounds,
There we
obviously.
go. Obviously, that's the
Because you don't get in trouble for skipping if you just sit in your car in class, obviously.
yeah.
Yeah. All
I
right.
also just made a note of him talking about his parents, that he truly thought of them as his mother and father, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll get into it more later. The Carlisle and uh Emmy,
Esme.
Esme. Yeah, there we go. Um okay, so Twilight chapter 2. I only have two notes for the whole chapter. Are you ready to jump
But
in?
yeah, yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Um my oh, okay. Gosh, I crack myself up. Okay, so my first note is just that I'm curious to read Edward's chapter because like it's such a dramatic flip that I was legitimately excited to read his perspective with this one, which is really fun for the tandem read. So
Yeah,
I
I have
loved
a lot of
that.
those notes when reading Twilight. I was like, I wonder what his perspective is on this. Like,
Yeah,
what is he thinking in this moment?
yeah. Um, and then my only other comment on the entire second chapter is loving the start of this banter. I get it again. Like re being like, oh, okay, I get it. I get it. I get
Yeah,
why they're in love. I get why I'm Team Edward. Yeah, so that was mostly most of my thoughts were like loving the banter. I'm loving that we're starting it. That's all. End of thoughts.
I made excuse me, I made a note about Charlie talking about where he was kind of defending the Cullens, because Bella talked about
Oh
how
yeah.
weird, and he kind of goes on a little monologue talking about how Dr. Cullen is a brilliant surgeon and all this stuff. And I made a note like right after I read that saying, I feel like movie Charlie would not defend the Cullens this much or even speak this much at once. And
No.
then like one sentence later, it says that Bella's like, I don't think I've ever heard Charlie talk as much. I'm like, okay, I guess movie Charlie true character for book Charlie as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is interesting. Particularly, I think some of his reservation around Edward later in the series, that I'm remembering. Like, it was interesting that he was so defensive at first here.
yeah, I agree. I think it's also his thoughts change, when a
Yeah.
vampire starts dating your daughter. But
What? You're not just like, he's a good kid. His dad's a
yeah.
good surgeon.
And then the other thing was that got me in this chapter that I just it's total tangent, unimportant detail. But she talks about going to the library on Saturday and talking about it being poorly stocked, and she'd have to go to Olympia
Oh,
or Seattle to
yes.
find a good bookstore. And I looked it up, and I'm like, that's three and a half hour drive to Olympia or Seattle. I'm like, your car is not gonna make it there and back. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
her concern about the gas mileage of the truck has just occurred to her.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. A car that was what 40 years old at the time. Like,
yeah. Not eco-conscious. Bella Swan, not eco-conscious. You heard it here first.
the only other note in
Um,
this chapter that I had was whose reaction to their first time ever seeing snow is ew. I get not liking the effects of snow, but like who reacts that way the first time they ever see snow in their life? Like, I don't get that, but
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I get it, but I also really hate the cold and winter.
see, no, I
Again,
get hating the cold in winter, and we both grew up in Minnesota, so obviously
yeah,
we don't remember the first time we saw snow. But if you
yeah,
had never seen snow in your life, anytime I hear about anybody who has never seen it, always thinks how pretty it is when they first see it, and her
yeah,
reaction immediately is ew.
yeah. Yeah, she specifically says it looks like Q-tips falling from the sky, not pretty individual
Yeah,
snowflakes.
yeah.
Yeah, fair. Fair.
Anyway,
Yeah. All right. Yeah, not the
those were the only
most
things I had.
yeah, not the most notable chapter. I talk about it in Midnight Sun, maybe in Midnight Sun 2, if I'm looking at my notes. Yeah, but a thing, as we're transitioning into Midnight Sun, I really like that Bella is smart. Like, I just feel like the character of Bella gets a ton of hate. And while obviously I'm not a casting person, I do think that's in part Kristen Stewart. People really did not like her in that role, also, even people who like really like her as an actress. But I just feel like it's like, yeah, like people just hate Bella. And a lot of it comes from New Moon. I do know that. But I like that at least initially, like they're playing her as smart. And I really like in Midnight Sun that that's a thing Edward talks about, right? Is like noting how she's so much smarter than other people and she's like more observant. So, anyways, I did like that with the lab. Um, but yeah, Midnight Sun chapter 2 starts off in Alaska.
Yeah, this is what I referenced before that I was confused about where we were at. I was like,
Like,
he just goes to Alaska? Like,
yeah, I totally agree. Like, no context. We don't have the conversation with his family. We don't, nothing.
yeah,
He's in Alaska with some hoe named Tanya. Like, what's
which
up?
actually we
Uh,
do meet Tanya in the movies. I had to look up to see exactly who she was because I couldn't remember. But you
okay.
do meet the Denali cousins, and they are the
Ah,
people who live in Alaska. And
okay.
I did make a note though. They talked about Arena and Kate is not in the movie, but Arena
Okay.
and Tanya are. So,
Okay. Okay.
and
Yeah.
they're, I don't know if you remember, this is spoilers for later in the books and movies, that when they have Renesmee, that they
Yes.
bring her to these cousins, which makes sense when you get context behind the cousins. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Well,
yeah.
anyways, good old, good old Tanya. Also, can't say that if I had to hide my child from an evil group, that my first thought would be to go to like my husband's ex with not even ex. It's like
Yeah.
unrequited love. I guess they're
But
powerful
they
vampires.
they
Yeah.
like been with humans before, which I also was like, why are like they so freaked out later on about Edward and Bella getting together when we know that this has happened with other people? But whatever.
Yeah. 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 Um, yeah. Okay, so I really don't like also in this interaction he has with Tanya that he's thinking about Bella and he's like baffled, right? He's like baffled. Why is she taking up so much of his mental space? But part of it is he's like saying how like unremarkable her face is. And basically, in a nice way, saying like, she's not that pretty. Why do I care? Like, that's kind of how it felt to me.
Yeah.
And then he's like comparing her to this vampire who's into him, being like, she's a hottie, but I'm not into her. Why do I have to think about this like unnotable human?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, which I'm like, again, not loving the tone. This is part of my like, am I gonna be Team Edwards till the end of this? But once again, guys, it goes away fast. It's really hot and cold here. Um, yeah, but okay, so then this leads me to my next thought, which is kind of the vibe I'm getting from this chapter and kind of like confirmed even within this section of 1 through 4 is like the idea that Edward is kind of only into Bella because she's a mystery to him,
Yeah.
which I like that the idea that like she's the first thing that's been unexpected in his life in however long, like which I do get, like there's something like noteworthy about that, but like his fixation on her is just like weird. Like it literally is like, no, she's just the first thing that you haven't been able to like read their mind and like absolutely predict what's going on. And you're like just so baffled by that she's unexpected, which
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel mixed about. I feel real mixed about.
Yeah, no, I definitely had notes on that and was thinking the same thing and was also wondering about like why he couldn't read her thoughts and
Yeah.
like if there was some specific reason like destiny fate kind of thing because I genuinely
Yeah.
don't remember from the books and I maybe it was talked about in the movies and I just don't remember like why he can't read her thoughts. And then I'm like, is it supposed to be some fate thing? And then of course I went to Akatar once again and I'm
Me
like, is it some
too.
mate thing, you know,
Me
like destined
too.
to be together?
No, literally, this is where my ACOTAR notes start. Which ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses, if you don't know, we've already spoiled it for you. So just get over that and read them. Okay. You know, I literally had the same thoughts. This is where I first write about this because I literally say, like, is this a fated mates kind of thing? Like in that genre, or that trope. And that's why he can't read her mind. I love that we had the same thought about that. That's
You too.
cute.
That's pretty funny.
Um, yeah. And then I also just think it's interesting. Like, I was looking up when ACOTAR was published and the books and like just comparing some of that, like specifically with Midnight Sun, because some of the wording of like her describing Edward's mind reading it was reminiscent of like how I hear Sarah
Spoilers.
J. Maas talk about, yeah, Resand. Um, so yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And I thought like I'm curious, Amy, if before we jump in more, like have initial thoughts, because obviously like Twilight gets a lot of like hate specifically for where they veer off from the traditional, I put in huge quotes because I think it's dumb that anyone feels like we need to honor the tradition of vampires. But like Twilight takes a big veer, right? And that's honestly like a big criticism people have, right? Is that they're not the stereotypical vampire characteristics. They don't have the same vampire weaknesses, like things like that. And so I just think it's interesting. And I think Sarah J. Maas does similar things with the Fae or fairies also around like iron and things like that. So it's just yeah, it's interesting where Twilight goes. And I think this is a great example of like the line of fiction being able to be like, in some ways, like I like the freedom that Stephenie Meyers has in being like, no, I'm writing a vampire world. The vampires are going to be what I want. Like I kind of like that, even though I get where people like are annoyed about it. So I'm curious like your thoughts generally around like the vampire lore.
Yeah, I also kind of like it. I feel like it's our first agreed on hot take of the series. We
Yeah.
both kind of like it. Like,
Yeah.
um, I get the criticisms because like if I had, read other vampire books or whatever and then came to this one, it's probably going to be a lot different. I don't know because I've never read any other vampire books, however. So I really like it. Um, but
Yeah.
obviously it is different. But I like that it's kind of its own world rather than being the same as where you'd see other vampires. But that's just me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I am like into the idea. Like, I think if I was an author, I would feel obligated to stick to some of these like rules about fantasy creatures. And like, why? Like that's really what I thought about is like, why do I feel obligated to like hold this fake mythical creature into a belief? And maybe there's some things where that's different. Like, maybe if there's a strong like cultural history, people feel more like into it, like talking about like banshees and like Irish folklore. There's more there, but I don't know that vampires have that. I don't know. I don't know. Hot take. I guess I'm fine with it.
I
Yeah.
also think it kind of speaks to, I don't know if you're aware of how the idea for Twilight started.
No.
Oh, it was that Stephenie Meyer had a
Oh
dream of
wait.
one of
Yes.
the scenes, and then she wrote a book, a whole series based off of one dream. And I feel like maybe she had this dream, and I'm curious in the dream if she even knew if they were vampires. I don't know. She talks about it being the meadow scene, which I don't remember exactly what they talk about there, but um and I'm curious if she knows anything about vampires.
Yeah.
If she just decided like to that's a that is what she was going to do with it, or I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. We could maybe honestly do a whole, maybe between books at some point, do a whole episode on Stephenie Meyers because also I started like researching and reading a lot about her. If you didn't know, she graduated with an English or maybe creative writing degree from BYU, which is where a ton of big fantasy authors have come out of. Brandon Sanderson is currently a professor at BYU. Um, there's somebody whose name starts with an O. I'm so sorry, fantasy lovers everywhere, that I'm forgetting them. Anyways, but super interesting. And obviously, BYU has its own controversies. It's the largest Mormon university, if you didn't know. So super interesting. Super interesting.
No, I don't know much
Yeah.
about her actually. I only know Twilight related things. I didn't know she
Yeah.
went to BYU or any of that until you had mentioned it before.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, all right.
Okay,
Um,
jumping back.
yeah, jumping back. I think that's where I end for my Midnight Sun chapter 2 uh notes. I jump
Yeah,
into
I
Twilight
I
3
have some
next.
notes. When they were in Alaska, he talks about like as he said some words, he could see himself leaving Alaska, going back to this place. And I'm like, so he went to Alaska and sat in the snow for 6 days and was debating leaving his family that he lived with for 80 years. And seconds later, he's just like, nah, just kidding. I'm gonna go home. And that had me wondering, I'm like, does Tanya have some power that we don't know about that convinced him to leave? Like, but I don't think she would have done that. I don't know. Like, it was
Yeah.
just a little confused.
Yeah. No, it is funny when you put it that way, particularly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at my other notes on this. I just have all my notes of everything that I highlighted. And I highlighted a lot of stuff, so I'm trying to sort through the things. Oh, yeah, one of the notes that I made that I don't know if we got this in the original saga or not was it was mentioned about Emmett killing someone as a vampire,
Oh, yeah.
which I have no recollection of. I don't think that that's talked about. Do
Yeah.
you? Well, you also
I
didn't read
don't,
that Edward read mine. So.
yeah, I don't know that I'm really the person to ask. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I, to my knowledge, I do not remember that. But I do remember that Emmett was the most intense, and I thought that like Edward was the most nervous about like Emmett hurting Bella. But maybe I'm misremembering that, and it was always Rosalie, and it's just that they're together.
Yeah. See, in my mind, and maybe it's just because I watched the movies a fair amount, that I'm like, oh, Emmett's just a big, dumb kind of person. Like he just doesn't have a lot of thoughts going on, which they kind of do talk a little bit about in the books. Edward
Yeah.
makes some comments of that, but I'm like, and he just seemed like, I don't know, like I just did not expect that background story at all. But
Yeah. But also of them, like I'm not surprised that him and Rosalie have killed a bunch of people.
yeah, yeah. I'm not surprised
Although,
about Rosalie. I guess I'm surprised
yeah,
about him. But
I don't know.
I think
He's
that's
just
also part of the
given,
reason that I just find them weird as a couple is I just think they're very, very different people. But
yeah. I mean, they are, but he's giving, like football bro,
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah,
like a little, like, yeah, yeah, like that.
yeah,
So I don't know. I could see it.
yeah.
Football bros be doing crazy unhinged things every day?
I also made a note of, or wait, am I in the right thing? Oh yeah, it goes back to just chapter two. Go back to when at school. Yeah, we just have only really talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it's talking about like kind of his perspective, seeing that he thinks Bella is like very fearful of him and things, and in reality, she's like just like curious. And I'm like, I'm wondering if Bella was written as kind of clumsy to show that she didn't have great instincts or reactions to things,
Uh,
because everyone else is afraid of Edward, but she's more intrigued. So that was
yeah.
kind of a thought that I
Huh.
had. But
That's interesting because I feel like my interpretation of Bella has been different. Like I talked about before, I really like that Edward's perceiving her, like the more he starts talking to her, the more then, which maybe this is the next section, but that he then is starting to realize like she actually is like noticing things other people
yeah, I had some notes.
aren't.
Yeah, I had some notes on Bella talking about how like I think she's obviously clumsy and not athletic and whatnot. And I think she also, I don't know if she necessarily has good or bad instincts, but I kind of get the vibe that she doesn't. But I think she's very observant of things. Like you definitely
Mm,
get that from her, or at least I do.
yeah.
And that she obviously notices things. And I made some note about um in Midnight Sun, he talks about like looking at like patterns on the walls or something in the cafeteria. And that was
Yeah.
something that Bella like noticed that he was doing. And
Right.
yeah, she obviously picks up on things very, very well, unlike other
Yeah.
people, clearly, which is good for the Collins.
Yeah. Right. Uh, yeah. Yeah. Very, very interesting.
A very minor note once again, but I find it entertaining how annoyed Edward is by Mike, and I can't wait to hear his thoughts on Jacob. So,
So true. So true.
which is why I'm disappointed it isn't the whole series because I don't think we get much Jacob. I don't even know. Do Edward
Yeah.
and Jacob meet in the first book? They must. But
I, yeah, I honestly don't know because I feel like Jacob basically is barely a character till New Moon,
yeah,
Like, um, yeah. Okay, I remembered my thought, which was like, okay, this idea, both of Bella being like a little more like maybe clumsy. I mean, that part's a little more of a stretch, but this observant, reserved kind of thing is very much like parentified child.
mm-hmm.
And which is obviously her situation. Like she talks about like she basically is taking care of her mom for all this time. She gets here, now she's taking care of Charlie, she's making dinner, like she's bringing herself to school. Like she is kind of that like quiet, don't ruffle any feathers. She's kind of like walking on eggshells in a way that feels like she's not in imminent danger, but like at least emotionally, she is kind of walking, she's tiptoeing around her parents a little bit and like making choices that are worse for her parents' perceived happiness, right? Her mom doesn't ask her to move, she chooses on behalf of what she thinks her mom wants, right? Um, which again, like typically when you see parentified kids, right, they are more observant because you spent your whole life looking for these tiny, subtle cues to avoid and be in charge of, like as a child, the emotional regulation of your parents. So I do think like that's actually pretty good writing that then she is more observant than maybe this like small town basic other kids. Yeah, so I think I don't know, that's interesting.
Yeah. No, I definitely
Hmm.
agree and picked up on some of those same things. In fact, one of my notes for one of the first things in chapter 3, if we're ready to move on, was about um her talking about how she wasn't used to being taken care of, and Charlie's unspoken concern caught her by surprise, talking about
Yes.
the chains on her tires for the snow. And I'm like, that's really sad.
I know it was sad and like so sweet. That's my first
Yeah.
note for Twilight chapter 3, like which we can I mean jump into if you're good, but just like so like that is such a sweet scene that I totally forgot about and just that like and very like Charlie, right? Like I think it's building kind of his character that he does want to take care of Bella, but doesn't know how to like talk about it. And so he just puts the chains on her tires. Also, they must have really bad ice to need chains on your tires. But
Yeah. I did
anyways,
notice in the movie version that it was changed to snow tires, and I'm like, that seems much more reasonable.
yeah,
but,
that's a lot more realistic to be honest.
but I guess I don't know.
Uh,
I don't know things about old trucks. It was a truck from like the 60s. Can you put regular snow tires on that? Probably. I don't know.
yeah. Yeah, maybe not. Or maybe it's like so heavy that it's like, who knows? Anyways, not the point. We're not here to debate the legitimacy of snow tires versus chains.
What?
Uh crazy. Um yeah. Okay, my next note after the snow tires being sweet is just to like take a moment. What an iconic moment in the movie, in the books. Like this is such a turning point mostly from Bella's perspective. Obviously, it's like a big emotional turn for Edward's character, but I just think like, and I liked Edward's chapter, but it's just such an iconic moment. It's one of the first scenes I think of in Twilight. Is him
Yeah.
like stopping the car? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Hmm.
Um, my notes regarding that are how Edward Cullen is the inventor of gaslighting. Because he's like, what are you talking about? I was standing right next to you. I wasn't across the parking lot. Like,
Literally being like, um, I've noticed that when I just lie to people really confidently, it creates doubt for themselves. That
yeah,
is
no, I
gaslighting,
have that
a
highlighted
hundred
for the
percent.
next chapter of Midnight Sun. It was talking about oh, let me find it. It's a good quote. I knew from experience that if I was very confident as I lied, it made any questions less sure of the truth. Any questioner less sure of the truth. I'm like, yep, he loves to gaslight.
Edward Cullen, initiator of gaslighting. Just kidding. The first time someone gaslit was not 2005, guys. But still, yeah, no, a little
He's a
cringy.
prime
It's pretty
example of it.
cringy.
Or then later in this chapter, and they're at the hospital, he says, Bella, you hit your head. You don't know what you're talking about. Which,
It's just such a classic example of have you seen that TikTok that's like talking about like if real men ever acted like how like the fantasy like fictional main character in these books acted? Like everyone would be like, "You're the grossest person ever," but when it's like, "Oh, but he's a vampire, so it's hot, right?"
yeah. No, I kept thinking of those gaslight gatekeep girl boss memes.
Yeah.
I'm like, this sums that up pretty well. So
Oh man. Yep. Um Yeah, my do you have more notes or thoughts specifically on the crash?
I didn't really have specifically on the crash like before they get to the hospital. I don't have a ton of
Yeah.
notes on this chapter to be honest, but
Yeah. Yeah. My next notes are about the hospital. It also makes sense. This was super short. It was like literally 13 pages.
Yeah,
Maybe
which
it was the
is
whole chapter.
short for these
Yeah.
chapters.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, my next note is just noting how nice Carlisle is. Like I just love him.
I love Carlisle. Carlisle has always been my favorite character in Twilight,
Uh,
and I think still is. We'll see with the
he's
reread, but
he's
he's
a
my favorite.
gem. He's a gem. I know in Midnight Sun chapter 4, I highlighted the section where Edward is saying like Carlisle is the soul of the family and Esme is the heart. And I'm like, that's what
Yeah,
I want to be in my marriage.
there's so
Anyways, couple goals, couple goals.
also because
Yeah.
of my love of Carlisle, another spoiler for later in the specifically the movies, why I was devastated by that scene in Breaking Dawn Part 2. I was like, this was not in the books.
No, it was so upsetting. Oh, Carlisle, the true love, the true love.
But um
Yeah.
speaking of Carlisle, I had a note about when Bella first met him saying my intuition flickered. The doctor was in on it.
Yes, I wrote that also. Oh,
Which I feel like speaks to her being observant as well, because
yeah.
nobody
Yeah.
else picked up on that he was in on something, and she's been there
Right.
2 days.
Yeah. And I was saying like her being smart in my I was saying as in I wrote to myself in my notes. Like her being I feel like her noticing these details makes the mystery better. Like it's more fun than like
Yeah.
us as the like audience, quote unquote, being like, "Oh, we know, but she's an idiot who hasn't figured it out." Like she knows, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
makes it more fun.
I did have notes talking about in regards to that, like what it would be like doing this tandem read if you had never read Twilight before, because
Yes.
I feel like it might be confusing. You just saw, well, like you said, all of a sudden would be like Edward reads minds.
He's a vampire?
Yeah, he's a
Yeah.
vampire. Like I'm curious what that perspective is like. But
Yeah. Yeah, if anyone is reading this for the first time, please let
yeah,
us know your thoughts so we can share them in the
you
podcast.
can
Because
email
I'm also,
us at glitterymusingspod@gmail.com.
yes, in fact, please do. It'll justify us starting an email.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think that's really interesting. I also think, like, if I was just reading Midnight Sun and had zero, like, I wasn't reading Twilight, I would think Bella was some kind of mythical creature also, or like she was some
Sure.
kind of like nerdy siren or something, because like the confusion and tension and mystery that Edward feels like towards her, and he's like, why can't I read her mind? Like, I would think, or she's like a witch and she's put a spell over herself or something for her
Yeah.
mind,
Yeah.
Like,
Typically, if you were reading from that
yeah,
perspective and there was something weird and this had never happened before, you'd think, oh, mythical creature instead of, oh, this girl that for some reason I
yeah.
can't read her mind.
Yes. And I do like from that perspective, reading both of them, it feels like they're a little more like balanced and like even than just like super old, super powerful, rich, cool, mythical dude, 16-year-old girl. Like that power balance is so uneven and so much a fantasy. And this, it still is overtly. Like, I'm not trying to sell that it's not, but it's a little more like that he is so baffled by her and she's noticing things and he feels like he's slipping up and like revealing his hand a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of into that. I like it.
Yeah. The only other note that I have for that chapter was something we already talked about, and it was more gaslighting with telling her about how she
Yeah.
hit her head. So,
Yep. 100%. 100%. Uh, yeah, I mean, maybe to be a vampire in a human world is to gaslight, right? But like that's like what he talks about he should be doing, right? As we transition into Midnight Sun, chapter 3. I mean, that's immediately what he's saying. Is like he's going over how he should be selling it to his teachers, how he should be talking about it, but he's like not. And he's so like just like can't engage really at all. And he's being like short and talking about what a disservice it is to his family that he's not gaslighting everyone in the town, which
Yeah.
again, he is overtly lying to everyone about who he is. So I get he's trying to continue selling the lie, but also, ooh,
I feel like he's just used to his lies being believable versus this is like,
yeah,
you were on the opposite side of the parking lot and then you were right next to me in half a second. How is that possible? And
yeah,
clearly it's not. So,
right, right.
versus the
And that
other things
he,
that he lies about,
yeah,
like, are more things that are like perceivable by humans as being possibly true.
yes, yeah, like I went to an advanced school in Alaska or things like that, and that's why I'm smart.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Also,
yeah,
speaking of him being smart, at some point, I don't know if it already happened or not, he talks about having two medical degrees. I don't not
yeah,
remember that. I don't think we knew that. I didn't
yeah.
know.
I think that's in Midnight Sun pretty early, maybe
Yeah,
chapter one, where he's talking about how boring and dull high school is because
I
he
think
like
so.
already has, yeah, two medical degrees. But then when they're in the hospital in this last chapter, he talks about like, well, he wants to get her with Carlisle because Carlisle has hundreds of years actual practice and he has two theoretical degrees. So I was like, oh, is that like he like went to college, but he never got to a place where he was like actually practicing,
Yeah,
which I think it's whether it's referenced in the books or the movies, but talking about how strong Carlisle is because he's around blood so much and he doesn't act on it, and that he's like kind of has the most like self-control of the whole family. So
yeah.
maybe it's that, like he studied it, but anyways,
Yeah, I did have a question about because at some point I think it was in this chapter I was trying to find my notes on it, but can't. I'm talking about how Carlisle has been doing it for hundreds of years, and I'm like, how old is Carlisle? Like, how long has he been doing this? That's kind of crazy.
yeah,
Also, to think about
yeah.
someone being a doctor that long and all the progress in medicine made, like, must
That's
be
what I
crazy.
Yes, that's what I thought about is like, are you like an old school doctor then? Or like, but like clearly not so old school.
I
Like,
mean, clearly they have to all evolve over time in order to
yeah,
fit in.
yeah,
So
yeah,
he's
yeah.
probably better than an average old
Yeah.
white guy doctor, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
He's a vampire white guy doctor who
yeah,
looks
whole different
young.
thing. Yeah. He's really old, but he doesn't look like it.
Yeah,
Totally different.
that's the difference.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, um, I do think I didn't have tons of notes for Midnight Sun chapter 3. More of my notes are on chapter 4. I thought, chapter 3 was interesting, but again, was just kind of the like reflected. We've kind of talked about everything I had
I
written
have a fair
down.
amount of notes on chapter
Okay, great.
but I'll just talk about, and I went through and highlighted some of the more things that I was interested in talking about for sure.
Yeah.
One thing that I noted was that about Carlisle again, that I've always loved Carlisle, but it's really nice to have like a perspective from Edward and how much he likes Carlisle too, like, and just their
Yeah.
relationship, and that it is really like father and son, even if it's not, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
they do a good job selling like the genuine love between at least the parents and the kids.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I also made a note about he just talks about um sorry, I'm just reading my notes. Edward talks about Bella and seeing her in pain and how it's causing him pain and stuff. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and he's confused by his feelings. And I'm like, you're telling me this man has been alive for 100 years and has never been in love with someone. That's basically the vibe I'm getting. I'm like, you don't realize that you're in love. Like, have you ever been in love? Like, and I appreciate that later Alice does call it out. And I'm like,
Yeah.
thank you, Alice. But
Yeah, for real. Yeah, both it is classic that his two like sister figures can call it out, right? Because Alice is like trying to be tactful about it, and then uh Rosalie is literally like, no, I don't even know. I don't even need to see Alice's visions. It's so obvious Edward is falling in love with this human.
mm-hmm.
How Edward of him, like, but how isn't that like truly like a real family dynamic though? Like the two sisters being like, this is so obvious. Like, are you joking?
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
he talks about he like at the beginning of this chapter is talking about how he's living with like these three couples, which I've never really put that together. Yeah, Edward's the one single person and the rest of them are all coupled up, but he's
Yeah.
talking about that, and then just like a couple seconds later he's talking about how his world is all of a sudden revolving around Bella, and I'm like, how are you not putting these things together, my man?
Right. Yeah.
But those were most of my notes. I have another note. Seriously, how does he not realize he's in love with her? Another King of Gaslighting comment. How long has Carlisle been a doctor? With a bunch of question marks following it. Yeah. Oh, something else that I have of note here was talking about how he was reading people's thoughts, and sometimes that he doesn't hear words, but he just gets like their feelings. He says wordless anxiety
Mm.
and guilt and that sort of thing. And then the fact that he can't pick up all of Charlie's thoughts either. And I'm like, what's that about? Like, it's very briefly mentioned. And I'm like, is it somehow
Yeah.
genetic that they can't read their thoughts? Like, I don't know. That just had me intrigued. But
Yeah.
I don't remember if we get
Yeah.
into that or not. So,
Right. Yeah, I'm very excited for the explanation
yeah.
around that. That I don't know
I'm
if
sure
it's
we'll get
coming.
more of it from Midnight Sun because
Right.
it, from his perspective. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm. Yeah, more thoughts on chapter 3. I realized I combined the note section for 3 and 4, and yeah, all of them are about 4. So
Yeah. No, that's pretty much the notes that I had. So I'm good to move on to
yeah,
um yeah.
great. Um, yeah, I so the main thing that I thought was worth discussing is this dilemma that he has in the conflict with his family. So for context, chapter 4, this is the first chapter we're getting that's like additional content beyond just the like back and forth between Edward and Bella's POVs. And this is him with his family, like really losing it. Like his family's losing it at him. They're so pissed that he has basically exposed all of them and has like brought so many questions up now. And so they're kind of dealing with this all together. And I think it's really an interesting debate, right? Like, what is the more ethical move? Is it more ethical to have done this and now fled so that you're not risking this human's life and not like gonna attempt that, but then you're gonna have more rumors around it, and you're the main person that is intercepting these thoughts for your family and is able to get like a vibe on the temperature of like where people are at emotionally and the rumors going around with your family? Or is it more ethical to like stay, but also like because you don't want to upend your family's life, but also like you're essentially putting a human's life on the line kind of for your own curiosity about like why you have this intense like connection with them. Yeah, so I don't know. I thought that was a really interesting debate to
Yeah.
talk about.
It definitely reminds me of, I was like, oh, I had a note on this somewhere, and it was actually back, I think, in chapter 1 of Midnight Sun, where Edward talks about how it was he could read people's thoughts and would be able to tell if someone was onto them. And he says rarely, extremely rarely, someone would guess right. We didn't give them a chance to test their hypothesis. We simply disappeared to become no more than a frightening memory. And I just commented on that, and I was like, imagine having a thought of someone in your town being a vampire, and then suddenly their whole family disappears forever. Wouldn't you feel like you're going crazy? Like,
Yeah, that is like maybe people don't talk like you become like the ghost story no one believes then, but I definitely feel people talk about it more because you're leaving, which is what they're pointing out in this discussion here. Like that Bella is actually more likely to talk about how weird this thing was with Edward if he just like left, and even more like if their whole family just left.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It
I
is,
know.
you
And
would feel
it was
crazy.
an interesting dilemma since he can't read her thoughts and he has no idea if she's on to them or not. I
Right.
mean, at this point, it's fairly obvious she's like, something's up. What's going on? But
Yeah, she's pushing
he doesn't
him
know
to be
how
like,
much he's
yeah, yeah. She's pushing him to be like, tell me what is going on. Like, you need to give me a real answer, you
yeah.
know? Um, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. And okay, this is also my other note is about like him. This is where it's like confirmed. He basically admits I am into this girl because of the mystery and because like of course it's natural for me to like fixate on this when it's the first new thing in so many years, which honestly I as much as I want to criticize that, I feel like I would maybe be the same if I was a vampire. Like
Yeah.
a new thing, like
Yeah.
zoned in,
Novelty
you
is
know?
rare when you're over 100 years old.
Yes, yeah. Um, yeah, but I thought the dynamics between the family were really interesting in this chapter. Um, one thing like that I don't think I've really talked about is the relationship. I really like in Midnight Sun the relationship that you get a glimpse into between Alice and Edward, and really feeling like, maybe Alice is like one of his closer friends. It kind of feels like Alice and Emmett are closer to him. Um, of the siblings, which also makes sense. He's known them longer, but specifically him and Alice seem to do a lot of like playing off each other. They're the two siblings with like the mental gifts. And you really see like Alice kind of being a little more like neutral, trying to respect Jasper, but also kind of advocating for Edward in this chapter.
Yeah, I think definitely seeing it from Edward's perspective, you do see a lot more of his relationship with Alice and about how close they are. And I knew I had it highlighted somewhere, so I found this, and it was a quote. Once again, it was from the first chapter of Midnight Sun, saying about we had to stick together, Alice and I. It wasn't easy being the freaks among those who were already freaks. And I'm like, that clearly is also illustrated and not just stated that way. But yeah, I
Yeah.
like seeing their relationships because Alice is another one of my favorite characters as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think she was probably my favorite of the family reading the books. But yeah, Carlisle's a gem, but just you just want to be besties with Alice,
Yeah, yeah,
which leads to
yes,
obviously the big revelation, which I thought was so interesting that they knew so early on that Bella was going to be turned into a vampire and that Alice was like, the future is like clear, becoming more clear all the time. Like, she's going to become a vampire, she's going to be part of our family, or she's going to die.
yeah.
Like, those are the
I was
options.
not expecting that because it seems like
No.
it isn't so much later in the books or movies is what I mostly remember. That we like see Edward be concerned about that at all. And maybe it's just because, obviously with these visions, it changes based on what's happening and like they aren't set in stone kind of thing. So maybe the whole time Edward was like, nope, that's gonna change and just was kind of in
Yeah.
denial about the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that denial I think is key, right? Like it almost seems like he's so adamant, like, no, 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 no. Which I think one is interesting because we don't have a lot of perspective of like why, like the cost, like why is he like, no, it's so horrific that Bella would become a vampire? Because I think it seems to me at least that it's more that than he's like shocked that he's in love with a human. Like he's not like freaking out saying no because he's in love with her. He's saying he's freaking out that she's going to become a vampire. So we don't have that
And
information
yeah,
yet.
I was definitely questioning that too because it also talks about at some point about how um Esme is like full of joy about it. And I'm like, why is Edward so upset about it? And like it seems like other people are happy with being vampires and Edward is not. And
Yeah.
I
Which
don't
I feel
know, it's
like
interesting.
Yeah, I feel like I remember that from the other books, like that he
Mhm.
does kind of view it as a burden, and that's why he doesn't want to have to turn Bella. So I think maybe also, it is, I was not expecting it to be revealed this early, and I think that's an interesting lens moving forward. Like I'm curious how Midnight Sun is going to progress.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think he's in denial. I think he thinks like he's gonna find a solution that's different. He doesn't have to like deal with the reality that he slash someone is gonna turn Bella into a vampire. Because Alice isn't overt that like Edward turns her,
Yeah.
but that she's gonna be part of the family. Clearly, she's saying like they're friends, they're gonna be close. So yeah, I don't know. Interesting place to end our first chunk, actually. It's kind of a
Yeah. It
cliffhanger to
it
end
was
on.
it was a good place to end, I feel like. So
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts you want to add? I cannot believe we're gonna have talked for like what seems like maybe an hour and a half of
yeah,
the
it's
first four chapters of Twilight.
um
Correct.
I I don't have anything more specific on the books. I have separate notes for the movies, which I don't know if I have much on. We kind of have talked about the movies a bit as we've gone along. I don't know if we want to talk more about that or not, or if you have any notes on the movies or
Yeah, I don't have a ton of notes on the movies. I mean, most in this first section. I mean, we can talk about the intro. Obviously, people have lots of thoughts on the kind of long, weirdish intro, the deer in the woods. But most of my thoughts were just about we had a lot of iconic memes from this chunk. So that was most of mine, most
yeah,
of my thoughts.
that's true. Yeah, I'm looking. I don't have a lot of notes either. Um, yeah, I'm not sure there's a
Yeah.
lot to talk about the movies. Yeah, the only thing that like kind of hit me was about how early on in the movie Jacob is introduced. He's
Yep.
introduced like before Edward is, before anybody but like Bella and her parents are introduced. You meet
Right.
Jacob. Um,
Right.
and I actually watched some behind the scenes stuff on Twilight. And the reason that they did that was they wanted to introduce that character early on since he becomes a big part of the series but is not featured much in the first book. So,
Yeah.
which makes sense. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Gotta
just didn't
get
remember that
Taylor
in
Lautner his
books.
screen
So,
time.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also learned that apparently Taylor Lautner did all of his own stunts, which is kind of impressive when you get later.
Oh,
But
yeah. We'll be talking about that a lot in New
yeah.
Moon. The Taylor Lautner lore. Okay, I feel like that's why I have less thoughts on the movie because like a lot of my thoughts on the movies versus the books are around Taylor Lautner. And
So we won't talk about the movies at all until book two.
right. Maybe. And then Breaking Dawn. Anytime they like go totally different from the plots.
Yeah.
No, we'll have a lot to talk about with the meadow scene and things like that. But yeah.
My only thing about the movies that was quite a bit different is you get these flashes. So you got like the flash of the animal attack at the mills, which we don't know anything about in the books yet.
Yeah, that's
Well, no, I
true.
think Charlie mentions that there was some animal attack and that's why he's going to the police station, but that's about it. So it's interesting to have that perspective. But
Right. Yeah, there is nothing in this book so far hinting that werewolves are gonna come to play at all. At
right.
all. Or I mean, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, the animal attacks for sure are, I guess, the Cullens out hunting. Yeah.
Well, there no. We'll,
No?
we'll get there. No, it's not the Cullens.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The werewolves?
Nope,
The
it's neither of those.
vampires?
It's
Oh my
vampires, but it's not the Cullens.
gosh.
You don't
All
remember
right.
that?
No.
You remember the antagonist of this book? Do you remember how this book ends?
No, I'm
Oh,
just
this is
waiting.
great.
Okay, well, I know it's got to be something because something prompts Edward to flee to Brazil, apparently. But for all of New Moon, he's gone, and it's to protect Bella,
Yeah.
right?
Do you
Yeah,
remember
so
from
something.
what? Who?
I don't know. I feel like it's gotta be like rival vampires or I don't think the
I'm
Volturi are
shocked you don't
involved
remember
until
this.
later. No,
You
I
don't think
really
what?
don't. The Volturi are not involved until later. So I
correct?
guess it's got to be some rival vampires, but
That's so funny. You just
I
don't
would have
remember
zero
this.
idea. No,
I
I
love
thought the
this.
whole plot of this book was the tension of their love. I thought
I
that
mean,
was the
that is most of it,
antagonist.
but it gets tested somewhat by a
I
third
see.
party.
Yeah,
So,
the antagonist is not their love,
yeah,
their
yeah.
denial about their love.
It really is, I feel like,
Okay.
the very end of the books that it gets heavy with that stuff. It's probably like three-quarters into the book that before you even get
Oh,
introduced, but
spoilers for myself.
yeah.
So exciting. Wow, so much.
Don't you remember the baseball scene?
Yeah, but I didn't remember
You
what
don't
movie
remember what
that's in.
happens with the baseball scene. Okay.
Yeah, I just know there's a baseball scene. And
Okay.
honestly, part of me knowing that there was a baseball scene, it was like a fever dream because I was confusing the baseball scene of Twilight and the baseball scene of High School Musical 2.
No, that's totally fair. You're imagining that like Edward and Emmett end up switching clothes in the end.
Oh, what? I don't even know what
Do
the
you
joke
not know
about.
that
No.
in High School Musical 2? This is such a tangent. When they have the song "I Don't Dance,"
Yeah,
the
I'm
guy who
familiar. It was on my
plays
iPod.
um Ryan, and then
Yeah,
what's Corbin Blue's character's name in that? I can't remember.
honestly, don't know. Corbin
Anyway,
Blue.
but they end up switching clothes at the end.
Oh,
Like they
great.
don't they just are wearing different outfits. But anyway,
Yeah, nope. Yeah, and then
but
I
that's
was
pretty
looking
funny
up
that you were
uh,
confusing those two.
yeah, and I was looking up Twilight merch, and that's what made me be like, oh right, there's a baseball scene because there was the
Yeah,
Cullen family like baseball team jerseys.
it's another
So
iconic. I feel like all of the iconic like moments from the movies are really in this first one. Like, I mean, there definitely is
yeah,
later on, but a lot of it is this, which makes sense, I guess. It's the establishing one. But
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
I'm so
remember
excited to remember everything.
I know. I remember almost nothing from Eclipse. Like truly, literally nothing. Um, a few details from Breaking Dawn.
Yeah, I can't remember what Eclipse is. I'm sure when we get there, I'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember all this. But
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, so that's that. We'll get some genuine reactions of mine moving forward, I guess, because I really don't remember a ton. Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so let's maybe end by saying what people should read by next week.
I can pull that up. You can always follow our Instagram, has it all. It is pinned on our Instagram, which is Glittery Musings. Um, and it has the order that you should do too. But I will just pull it up, and it looks like Next week we are reading Twilight chapters 4 through 7, and Midnight Sun is going to be 5 through 7.
Yeah.
Um, so
And then about 12 minutes of the movie.
yeah, there is one week where we actually don't watch the movie at all because none of it is in the movies. It's all
Yeah.
book. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, so you can check out our Instagram to see what order you should do it in since it switches off chapters. But we're reading
Yeah.
about 150 pages each week. I don't think we talked about this, but
Oh, yeah.
that's our goal. And if anything changes, it will be updated there. So
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, if you have any thoughts or anything that you're like, how did you guys not talk about this from these four chapters, please send us a DM on Instagram, again, Glittery
yes.
Musings, or email us. And we'd love to read or share your opinions with our, four followers. We
Yeah.
would love that.
Even if you are discovering this, we actually have 7 followers now. Pretty exciting.
Ooh, blowing
Plus,
up.
we have my mom who is not following our Instagram, but said she would do the tandem read, which
Oh my gosh.
fantasy, not her thing. So I
Wow.
don't expect she's going to finish it, but she said she would. Um,
Can't wait. I can't wait for a Mary segment.
I know. Yeah. But I was going to say something. I forgot what it was. Oh well. Never mind.
Great. Well, yeah, follow
Oh,
us
I remember.
along. Oh, great.
If you are discovering this podcast much later and we have already recorded things, still send us your thoughts because I want to hear people's thoughts. So,
Yeah,
especially with
same.
the tandem read. So,
Yeah. Basically, the entire podcast is selfishly, we want an excuse to really like deep dive into this and like nerd out. Also moving forward, or in case you want to share this with a friend, our goal is like we're leaning more towards like serious. We both really liked the books the first time. Uh, we liked, we like the franchise. We're fans. We're not haters. This is not like a hating on Twilight podcast, but there is going to be like a little bit of hating, and we are aiming to be a little bit of a balance of like if you're a hater, hopefully you will still think this is fun. If you're a fan, you definitely will think this is fun. So, yeah, please share. We're so excited to just like nerd out about all this. So we really want to hear like all your thoughts. Please send us all the merch, like all the cool weird Twilight merch you find out in the world. Send us pictures, tag us,
everything.
everything. Everything. So yeah, that's all for this first week. Thanks for listening. And stay tuned to hear more things that I've forgotten that are essential to the plot of the book. Can't
Should be
wait.
fun.
Who knew? Who knew? There was so many in the first 4 chapters. Ugh. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.